Give me a moment to. um, Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So today I want to review the Speaking of a Nation, parts 1 and 2, that Elder Tess did on August 8, 2020. So almost 4 years ago now. And in this presentation, she began by emphasizing the importance of studying how the end of ancient Israel typifies the end of modern Israel. So at this time, especially after the shaking and split, which happened in 2019, it was important to see how Gethsemane and the wilderness time periods could be placed around November 9, 2019, showing us that there were two sequential testing time periods. So Gethsemane before November 9, 2019, and then the wilderness time period after. Elder Tess also noted that in the previous study, so the study before this one, the Speaking of a Nation, we are looking at modern Israel and our understanding that Christ was to return in the Millerite history, specifically in 1863, and then in the 1888 history. And then before going further into Millerite history, one of the points she discussed at the beginning of this presentation was how our understanding of truth advances. She said, because what I see happening is that as light grows and our understanding of the message increases, we look back on what we taught before, what we understood before, and we increasingly feel that our understanding in prior history was, put nicely, too simple, or to be put in an ugly fashion, was wrong. And people today are feeling unsettled, particularly considering how we have understood the Sunday law differently over the last 12 months. But in other areas as well, many are feeling unsettled at how we are, as some people place it, changing the message. If we made mistakes back then, how do we know that we're not making mistakes now? And so she gave two examples. So the first example was chemistry. Chemistry is a fascinating subject that deals with the foundation blocks of everything that makes us and the universe up. And when chemistry is first introduced in preschool, children are taught that everything is built up of this common tiny dot called an atom. Everything in the universe, from water to gold to human skin, is composed of atoms. And then as you progress, you learn that this building block is more complex. These atoms are made up of particles, such as protons, neutrons, and electrons. These atoms interact and join to form different molecules. For example, water is composed of two hydrogen atoms bonded to an oxygen atom. And you can see a depiction of that in the middle there. And then when you get to more advanced chemistry, you learn that the atom is so complex that scientists don't fully understand its structure and composition. It looks nothing like that little black dot. They started out by teaching you, as she put it, something that in actual fact barely connects to reality because that is the level of which we can understand and absorb it. It's so broad of a subject, there's so much complexity to it, that they have to take us through these simple understandings and build upon them to where someone from a little child to someone who has studied advanced chemistry can begin to understand the foundation blocks of the universe. And I think this is a little of how God has to operate. So she used this example of understanding what the atom is and what it entails, the foundational blocks of the universe, building blocks of the universe. And so that was the first example she gave. And then Elder Chess gave an internal example, and that was the king of the north and the king of the south. And so in our plowing history, right back here, Daniel 11:40 is opened up, and we start to understand the king of the north and the king of the south. And in 1996, Elder Jeff says that in 1989, the king of the South was defeated by the king of the North, fulfilling part B of that verse. The next thing is the Sunday law. This view was very simplistic, but it satisfied us and was necessary as an introduction in the dispensation of the plowing. And then in 2016, we understand that the war between the king of the North and the king of the South is not complete yet. They would be fighting again in the future battles of Raphia and Panium. Then the studies from 2016 to 2018 about Pyrrhus and World War II helped us to understand Raphia and Panium more. We began to see that 2016 and 2018 are battles as well as Raphia and Panium. And then we start to understand that this is all a current information war that is also a proxy war. And then we begin to understand the deadly wound and death concepts, helping us to connect the 1989 to 1991 time period with that of Panium to the Sunday law. And so this connects the Sunday law with the King of the North and the King of the South. We also start to understand World War I, which explains previous wars, such as the Gulf War and the Iraq War. And so at the very beginning in our plowing history, it was a simple explanation. 1989, King of the North, King of the South, complete. And now we have this complex, beautifully constructed understanding of the time of the end to the Sunday law of verse 41. We now know about information war, Islam, proxy wars, King of the North and King of the South, spheres of influence, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Venezuela. And Elder Tess said that it becomes a global message beyond just Russia and the United States. We have been following quite a similar train as how we need to be educated about the atom. It starts simplistic. You look back and you think, Elder Jeff was wrong to say that Daniel 11:40 Part B was fulfilled in 1989. But was he wrong? He couldn't say anything more. He's limited because we are limited. We could only absorb so much at each step. So it has to take 20 to 30 years from that to develop to the understanding that we have today. And we still have more to learn. And we may be tempted to think that what we have taught in the past is error, and that can do two things. It can shake our faith in this movement and the leading of God, or it can build our faith in this movement and the leading of God. And she said, to be frank, I did not understand why this process shakes people's faith in God's leading of the movement. For me, I just feel like a little child at his feet, as he's explaining parable by parable, more and more complex things. I could not have understood this when I came into the movement. It couldn't have been properly understood from 1996. He had to lead us through steps, and if it applies to this study, it applies to others. More than anything, we should see that it applies to how we understand the character of God. Because if God has to teach us of the external events in this fashion, how slow are we to understand the nature of Christ's kingdom and the character of God? That is also done through these gentle incremental steps, and they may not feel gentle if you're in them. So she gave another reason why we're so uncomfortable, and that is due to our overly simplistic understanding of other reform lines. For example, we can tend to view August 11, 1840 in the Millerite line as this simple event and miss its context and the surrounding events. August 11, 1840 did not happen in a vacuum. There was 1798, Napoleon, Turkey, Egypt, and various European treaties. In fact, there are other key events that people might think was more significant than what happened on August 11th. Our overly simplistic views of past reform lines can make us struggle when we see the complexities of our own line, so the line that we're on. In the time of Christ, when the disciples ask what the signs of the end of the world are, Christ can't speak directly. He gives an answer, and some people could consider it misleading, but it was something that could satisfy the disciples then and comfort and guide them. Over time, they understand better until the time of Paul, where he says that the man of sin has to be revealed, and the second coming wouldn't happen in their lifetime. And so Elder Tenz's point was that the movement is advancing with the advancing light, and that can tend to make the previous light look too simplistic. But that light was exactly what we needed, what we could absorb to get the point in that dispensation. Next, we want to look at the line of the end of ancient Israel. So here's our line. I got this graphic off the preparers of the Breach transcript that they did of this series. And so here we have our big reform line, and then we have our three groups called. We have the disciples, the Jews, and the Gentiles. The disciples went back at Pentecost to call out the Jews, and then the harvest of the Gentiles begins at 34 AD, which we can mark as the Sunday Law. And we see 4 harvests, so 1, 2, 3, 4, but there are 3 groups because the select few who are called to be among the 144,000 are called out from this first group. So we can say priests, Levites, and Nethinims, 3 groups, 2 from the church and 1 from the world. Now, where do we get these 3 groups from? It wasn't from the structure of the end of ancient Israel. We understood there needed to be 3 separate callings before. So we all know where we got it from, and that was from Ezra. Let's see this from another perspective. So we can mark 3 histories for ancient Israel and 3 histories for modern Israel. So we have, so God's people were called out from Egypt, and then Babylon, and then Rome. For modern Israel, we have the Millerites, 1888, and the 144,000. And we have our Alpha and Omega histories, Alpha and Omega histories. We can clearly see the 3 groups in the Omega history of ancient Israel here in Rome, but we first understood it from the structure of the calling out from Babylon and Ezra, so from this history here. Ezra 8:15 says, "And I gathered them together to the river that ran into Ahava, and there abode we in tents 3 days. And I viewed the people and the priests, and found there none of the sons of Levi." So these Israelites have come out of Babylon, and they're priests, but no Levites. So a second call has to be made to Babylon. So here we can see 2 calls to God's people, the church, priests, and then Levites. And then they also need a 3rd group to return with them to help with the sanctuary services, and that is the Nethinims. Ezra 8:20, also of the Nethinims, whom David and the princes had appointed for the service of the Levites, 220 Nethinims, all of them were expressed by name. And so here you can see the Nethinims. So they needed Levites, and then they needed the Nethinims, who were appointed for the service of the Levites. Okay, so let's just briefly review where the Nethinims came from. Their story is in Joshua chapter 9. And here the background is the kings gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. And the Gibeonites had heard what had happened to Jericho and Ai, and to save themselves, they engaged in this deception of Joshua and Israel. And Israel comes into a league with the Gibeonites, and then they realize they have been deceived, but they can't go back on their word. Joshua 9:27, and Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation, and for the altar of the Lord, even unto this day in the place which he should choose. And so that's what happened to the Gibeonites. And Elder Ted said their lives were spared, and they were incorporated with Israel in the association with the service of God's house. This position made them as unlikely as possible to seduce Israel from loyalty to Jehovah. The Gibeonites were afterwards known as Nethinim, that is, Gibeon. Patriarchs and Prophets 506.2 says, the Gibeonites were permitted to live, but they were attached as bondmen to the sanctuary to perform all menial services. Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. These conditions they gratefully accepted, conscious that they had been at fault, and glad to purchase life on any terms. Behold, we are in thine hand, they said to Joshua. As it seemeth good and right unto thee to do unto us, do. For centuries, their descendants were connected with the service of the sanctuary. So that is the Gibeonites, and that's where the Nethinims came from. And Elder Ted said, so we can see this is a fascinating picture of what happens. You have this group who don't rightfully belong with Israel, but they see that Canaan, that the enemies of God's people are about to be destroyed. And they say, purchase life on any terms. So they decide they are going to, by whatever means necessary, link themselves to Israel. And they do that. And to save not just themselves, but also the Israelites from being drawn into paganism, they are connected to the service of the sanctuary and instructed to participate in the sanctuary services, in the running of the Jewish religion, if I can put it that way. They're being incorporated into it instead of being separated from it, to save both them and the Israelite people from being drawn out into worldliness, into apostasy. When they do that, the kings of Canaan outside of the Gibeonites become infuriated at them, and they decide to make war with them. And it's the Israelites that are forced to step in and defend them. And without going any further into that, if you can picture in your mind the type of parable that is creating. So that was Elder Tess's commentary on that. So the main point is that 3 groups were associated with the service of the sanctuary. 2 were Israelite and 1 was from outside Israel. 2 from the church and 1 from the world. So when they're called out of Babylon to reinstitute the sanctuary services, they need the priests, Levites, and Nethinims to return. So the 2 points we have been making are, as we advance along a reform line, the truth taught before might be seen to be overly simplistic as our understanding grows and develops, not just of the message, but of the methodology used to unpack it. So that's the first point. Truth advances from simple to more complex. And then the second point is we got the 3 groups of priests, Levites, and Nethinims from Babylon, but we drew it most clearly in the reform lines associated with the end of ancient Israel. And then we apply that in Israel and see 2 calls for the church, then to the world at the Sunday law. And so we get our 3 groups, priests, Levites, and Nethinims from Babylon. We can see them most clearly in the end of ancient Israel in the line of Christ. And we can apply that to our line and see 2 calls for the church and then to the world at the Sunday law. Okay, so now we want to discuss Millerite history and how Christ could have returned in 1863. And for that to happen, what had to be fulfilled prophetically? This can be found in Great Controversy 440.2 to 442.2. And Ellen White is talking about the beast rising out of the earth. And she says, what nation of the New World was in 1798 rising into power, giving promise of strength and greatness, and attracting the attention of the world? The application of the symbol admits of no question. One nation, and only one, meets the specifications of this prophecy. It points unmistakably to the United States of America. And so in 1798, the US was rising to power, and this was symbolized by the beast rising out of the earth. Continuing to read. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted. every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. And so the points we want to pick up from this passage is that the lamb-like horns represents the character of the United States. And there are these two fundamental principles, republicanism and Protestantism. Could I have someone read these next two quotes for us? The first two bullet points, please.
But the beast with lamb-like horns spake as a dragon, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live. The lamb-like horns and dragon voice of the symbol point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation thus represented.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's the first two. So there are two things, lamb-like horns and dragon voice. And they point to a contradiction between what? They point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice. So which one represents the professions? And that is the lamb-like horns. And so the dragon voice would represent the practice. Ellen White connects the lamb-like horns to the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We could see that in this in this passage here. She mentions the lamb-like horns, and she mentions the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And so she connects that to these documents. And these documents are what make the beast like a lamb. It is the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that the U.S. professes to believe in. And going back to studies that Elder Tess did on modern Protestantism, the people who believe in the seven mountains of society, Trump and his administration, they all profess to believe in the Constitution, in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the separation of church and state. But their profession and practice don't match up. In practice, they speak as a dragon. The horns are what it professes, and the voice is what it practices. And the next sentence in that great controversy paragraph says, the speaking of the nation, this is the dragon voice, is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. So as we all know, there are three branches in the U.S. government. We have the legislative, which is Congress, and that's composed of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have the executive, which is the president, and we have the judicial, which is the Supreme Court, and then the other federal court. And the legislative writes laws, and the judicial interprets law. Ellen White states that the speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. She doesn't mention the executive branch. And so we can see this in 2014. 2014 was a Sunday law, and we can see how the legislative and judicial branches changed in that time period. In 2014, Mitch McConnell blocked President Obama from appointing judges. All 2014, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and Jeff Sessions began to purge the centrists from the Republican Party and turn it into a church-state extremist movement. 2014 was a turning point in the legislative and judicial branches of the U.S. government, which is required to speak as a dragon at the Sunday law. We need this change in the legislative and judicial branches. And we should note that this all took place under an Obama presidency. Elder Tess said that the steps taken in 2014 that impacted these two branches, the legislative and judicial, No matter what happens, at least in the next 50 years, if not in the next century, they have changed the United States to such a degree that it doesn't matter who the next president is, or the one after that, or the one after that, or the one after that. It would take generations to undo both branches changing course in 2014. And so, how does the executive branch relate to all this? The blocking of the judges and the purging transformation of the Republican Party into a Christian right extremist movement paved the way for a Trump presidency. Trump completed the purge and filled the judicial branch with people who believe in the Seven Mountains Mandate theology. So other tests are saying that the executive branch does impact these two branches. So the executive branch does impact the legislative and judicial, which is why you would expect to see the executive become a form of dictatorship. You have to have the executive branch change or transform somehow to be able to create the environment for these two branches to speak as a dragon at the Sunday law. That's a turning point, and we can see the gradual setup with the Sunday law. 2014 was the Sunday law for the priests. 2019 was the Sunday law for the Levites, and 2021 was the Sunday law for the Nethinims. And then we have the Sunday law for the 144,000. And so we can see this progression, these steps. The U.S. doesn't speak like a dragon out of nowhere. Other tests are saying that I'm not suggesting that the executive branch plays no role in that process. It plays a necessary role. Mitch McConnell is blocking Obama from appointing judges to the Supreme Court in 2014 because he's waiting for 2016 and the president they're designing and setting up for. So those actions weren't waiting for this president, Donald Trump, to be able to fill those judicial appointments. So he does play a role in that. What I want us to take from this is that it's the legislative and judicial branches that speak. They speak through law, and that it is possible to have them speak through law regardless of who is president of the United States. It is possible for them to act outside the control of Obama, for example. And so we can see 2014 as a turning point, changing the legislative and judicial branches to speak as a dragon at the Sunday law. Continuing to read the great controversy passage, could I have someone read the first bullet point for us, please?
By such action, it will give the lie to those liberal and peaceful principles which it has put forth as the foundation of its policy. The prediction that it will speak as a dragon and exercise all the power of the first beast plainly foretells a development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution that was manifested by the nations represented by the dragon and the leopard-like beast.
Thank you. So here we can see that the speaking shows its profession to be a lamb is a lie. And we can also mark or see this development here. There's a development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution. So this is a process. It's not an isolated event that leads up to the Sunday law. And can I have someone read this second bullet point for us?
I can.
Thank you.
Such action, is that it?
Yes.
Such action would be directly contrary to the principles of this government, to the genius of its free institutions, to the direct and solemn avowals of the Declaration of Independence, and to the Constitution. The founders of the nation wisely sought to guard against the employment of secular power on the part of the church, with its inevitable result, intolerance and persecution. Only in flagrant violation of these safeguards to the nation's liberty can any religious observance be enforced by civil authority. but the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with lamb-like horns. I can't see the rest. In profession, pure, gentle, and harmless. I can't read the last sentence. I can't see it.
You. In profession, pure, gentle, and harmless, that speaks as a dragon.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's focus on those last two sentences here. But the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with lamb-like horns, in profession pure, gentle, and harmless, that speaks as a dragon. And so there is this inconsistency. At the Sunday law, when the beast speaks as a dragon, what does it have? It has lamb-like horns. The lamb-like horns are the professions of the United States, and they never break. The US never stops professing to be lamb-like. That is why there's this inconsistency. Our previous understanding that one of the horns broke was because of our old view of a modern US dictatorship. We thought that the Sunday law, there would be this president who'd be a dictator, take everyone's guns away and throw away the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And God had to lead us to where we could see that a modern dictatorship looks different. Our old expectation of World War III was nuclear weapons and Russian troops on American soil. And we had to understand that it doesn't actually look like World War I and World War II. The message became both simple and complex. Now we see that these horns are never broken. The horns are the profession, and the US never stops professing. That is why there is an inconsistency. The horns are not broken. It's that the inconsistency between what the beast professes and what it practices increases through the development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution. And so in summary, we saw how light opens up and the message develops. That was the first point that Elder Tess was making. It's not that we look back over the past and say mistakes were made. It was God leading us gently and wisely. Another point was that we saw how we got the concepts of the priests, Levites, and Nethinims from the calling out of Babylon during the time of Ezra. And we can see these three groups clearly in the line at the end of ancient Israel, with the disciples, Jews, and the Gentiles. And then we focused on the Millerite history and what had to be fulfilled for Christ to return in the Millerite history. And that was the United States had to be speaking as a dragon despite professing to be lamb-like. We saw that the speaking was through the legislative and judicial branches. And although Ellen White never mentions the executive, we know that it affects these other two branches. And then we stated that the horns are never broken because the US keeps professing to uphold the Constitution and be lamb-like. And Adventists will be deceived by this profession. So I just want to go over the graphic here. I got this off the Repairs of the Breach transcript. And we went over this, the three histories of ancient Israel and modern Israel. You can see our three groups here, two from the church, priests and Levites, and one from the world, the Nethinims. This is an illustration of the profession versus practice. The lamb-like horns are the profession, and the dragon voice is what it practices. And we saw that there was a discrepancy between the two, meaning that the lamb-like horns, the profession, stays intact all the way through. We have this, sorry, I can't see this in my screen. So we have this line here from 1798 to 1863. This is when Christ could have returned in the Millerite time. And we can see that the US started to rise from the time of the end from 1798. And then there would have been a point where it would have started to speak as a dragon before Christ's second advent. We have our three branches here: legislative, judicial, and executive. So that would be the Congress, Supreme Court, and the president. And this is showing the different Sunday laws that all lead up to the big great test. So we have the priests, Levites, and Nethinims, 2014, 2019, and 2021. These are all Sunday laws on de facto lines, and then we have the Sunday law, the great test, on the big line, the 104 per thousand. And so that is all I have. Are there any thoughts or comments?
Well, it was a very good summary, and I'm sure it'll be a big help to Ron, who hasn't seen a lot of these presentations. And
That was great. You did that perfect.
Thank you. So do you get the points? It's like there are three main points that Elder Tess was making, and was it like clear?
Well, the point that I didn't even know about the lamb horns until now. So and I've had previously known about building on all of the things through World War II and then the 2016 and et cetera. And I have touched on the Sunday law with her, with the priests, the Levites, the Nephilims, and the 144,000. So it was good for me.
Thank you.
I have a question. When was the U.S. Constitution enacted, and when was the Declaration of Independence? Just wanting to see the differences.
I think the Declaration was 1776, right? Making me remember history.
1776?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Declaration, yeah, July 4th. And the Constitution was after that. Was it like 1787 or 90?
89.
1789.
1789.
Yep,
Yeah.
1789. So
So
Declaration of
what was the
Independence.
purpose? Yeah, what was the purpose of each?
So Declaration of Independence was just before they even had the war. It was just stating as colonies they wanted to be free from Great Britain. And then after the war, and they started to like have to come up with their own government, and that's when they drew up the Constitution. It was after the Revolutionary War.
So the inalienable rights is in the Declaration of Independence, right?
Yeah. Yes. All men are created equal, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So when the South, during the Civil War, they wanted this freedom, religious freedom. What were they citing? Were they citing the Declaration of Independence, or was it the Constitution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the Declaration of Independence. I feel like the Constitution, like the preamble and stuff, it was like more just talking about government, like we the people in order to form a more perfect union. But I think the Declaration of Independence was like more a broader.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think the South was going for religious freedom, though. They were going for states' rights, and they wanted to protect the institution of slavery and actually expand it.
How about the literal reading of the Bible? Where were they getting that? Was it just totally different? Was it from their Christian beliefs?
What, to justify the slavery?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, when did the Baptist denomination split in the 1840s. And that's where we get the Southern Baptist Convention. So they split over slavery. And then they use the Bible to justify owning another human being.
I have a question on the like why we said that the lamb-like horns broke. it was from this great controversy passage, right? That this republicanism and Protestantism that we got it from. Am I like understanding that correctly?
Yes, I think that's where we got it. I don't
So
remember
Elder
how.
Jeff was reading this passage.
Go ahead.
You go ahead, like this.
No, you go ahead. You finish.
Okay, so Elder Jeff was reading this passage and he picked up republicanism and Protestantism, and he was saying that they were these horns, right? Versus Elder Tess, she's coming back to this passage and she's seeing this this discrepancy or striking contradiction, and she's saying, no, lamb-like horns is more like their professions, which is, I guess you could say in a way, republicanism and Protestantism, but she was focusing more on like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the document, which I could see Republican and Protestant in that too. But so like, what made us say that they broke, I guess? Do we have like other models for that?
Yeah, and I don't remember.
What I remember is the Protestantism horn broke when the Protestant churches rejected the charts in 1842.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then
Mhm.
she says that there was a moral fall, right, in the
Mhm.
1840s. Now, the Republican horn, I believe it was broken after the 9/11, right? But now Elder Tess is saying, no, they still profess,
Mhm.
it's just, yeah, inconsistency. There was still professed lamb-likeness, but they will speak as a dragon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the apparent contradiction between their profession and their actions. And so I think that we need to, for the knowledge we have now, we need to scrap this whole idea that any of the horns were ever broken. I know that Elder Tess didn't like it, represented that way.
Yeah, and I think she even like used that too, right? With like Antigonus and like one of his eyes or something. Gotcha, or I don't know,
Yeah, she did.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this makes more sense, like the US would never ever like stop saying that it believes in the constitutions. And I think this ties in like she was saying to the apocalyptic view. We thought like there would be this dictator who just grabs everything, but no, like it will like
Mhm.
profess to be.
Right.
Are there any other thoughts or comments, questions?
The interesting thing is the 13 colonies, the way they were so created as, first of all, business ventures, or people were leaving for religious freedom and from persecution, but they were very strict in their laws regarding the church and, purity and morality and stuff. So it's really, it's kind of like there, we can see like going back to that kind of mentality where the Republican Party wants to do this morality thing and, make this a Christian nation. And the punishments that were given to the people in the colonies, and the persecution of different people, women, religions, things like that. And it was definitely church and state in the colonies. But then they eventually joined in and created a confederation, and then had a convention, and then got the the Constitution. And then church and state kind of disappeared for a while. You know what I mean? So it was, and then it kind of came back up. So really interesting history if you do an alpha and an omega. Because everybody's doing states' rights again now. Everything's being, you know what I mean? It's like the governors are little dictators in the red states. So anyway, but thank you so much. It was a great review. And it's very good timing.
Thank you. I was just like looking for a nice like study that, because like whenever I just go through Elder Testament studies, I see like how everything is so connected, and it's hard to like. I just kind of want to like draw in all the thoughts, and it's like hard to just take a presentation and just kind of do it because like she connects all these different ideas, and there's like
Yeah.
a flow of thought with all her presentations, and yeah.
Yeah, to me, that's the beauty of what Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter do. These really are not standalone. They're all connected. There's a wholeness to it. And that's really reassuring when you think about it.
Yeah, it's like all these threads interwoven and just it's like Elder Tessa's first Vesper study, she was also like coming back to the idea of simple and complex, like navigating the complex and
Mhm.
yeah, just being able to see fall of the King of the South. So like the theme is like always there. Like
Right. Yeah, and there's always so much more that you could, go deeper in, it's like, really does, what did that Declaration of Independence really mean? And when they said all men are created equal, did they really mean just men? White men, wealthy men who own property? So there's so much more that, you could be looking into. So.
the prophecy like really simplifies it and it just says like Eos Lamb like there like we can see all these flaws, but yeah, it's like really just kind of like traces the big what we need to focus on, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm. It is amazing when you think about the description, though, in the Bible, lamb-like beast, speaks like a dragon. It's like, wow. I mean, I remember reading Revelation decades ago and like, what the heck does this mean? I have no idea, and it wasn't until I became an Adventist and read Great Controversy, I'm like, wow, the United States is in the Bible and it doesn't look good.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah, like
first
going
real,
back to
real, that was my
Mhm.
first real taste of history. Church
Yeah,
history, especially.
it was such a phenomenal book. I mean, I cried when I first read that book. It was just so powerful how she put together that history from the beginning to the end. And it was just so powerful. I didn't understand a lot of it, but I got the gist of it. And I knew that I felt like I had really found God's true church. Because Protestants were not talking like that. And of course, I didn't really understand who Ellen White was in the beginning, and then I, understood who she was eventually, and so it became all the more powerful.
Just a clarification on the Great Controversy, we know that during the 1840s, 50s, and leading up to the 60s, we know that Ellen White wrote first volume of Spiritual Gifts, and that was their version of the Great Controversy back then. And it was supposed to lead them step by step. And we know that the Great Controversy, written in 1888, in that time period, we know that that was meant to lead the people at that time towards Christ's second coming. And so we can look at certain things in principle, but we also know that there are things that aren't going to line up with what's happening here at the end of time, because that book wasn't written directly for the time that we're living in.
Right.
Yeah.
But coming in as a Protestant and reading that book, it opened my eyes to a lot of things. It was really powerful. But again, like you said, it was, now that we know how to read dispensationally, and that has cleared up a lot of misunderstandings that we had as former SDAs.
The same experience reading The Great Controversy as you did, Kathy.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, you know, the whole Sabbath truth and no burning in hell and the state of the dead, all of that, you know, was really, I felt like I was just breathing the breath of heaven. I was blinded by the light. You know what I mean? There was just, even though it was, you know, because of I didn't know about the failings of the SDA church, but as a Protestant being introduced to these new truths, which the Sabbath and hell and the state of the dead were all valid. And then about 30 days into my time with the church, I was like, something's off. And I didn't know what it was. And, you know, I was seeing divisions and just different things. And then a year later, I was watching Jeff. So I had a very short time period within the SDA church. So that was 2014 to probably fall of 2015. And then I wandered around and listened to Jeff by myself and not go to church.
I jumped into the SDA church 30 years earlier than you in 1984. And the same thing, I was so struck with the straightforward message of understanding properly the state of the dead and the Sabbath and the different issues. And then as I continued to study, I recognized even when I first came in that something was wrong 30 years before, you know, you did. And the same thing is because I looked at the spirit of prophecy as a gold mine. And I'm not criticizing, but the majority of Adventists don't even ever read anything that's in the spirit of prophecy, and they take it all for granted, and they don't even know what's there. And that's how I started to get my eyes opened right around 1989, for sure, and beyond.
Thankfully, I think what's for me, when I was feeling that something was wrong, I still knew it was the right church. You know what I mean? And I didn't give up anything other than I was like, okay, Lord, I'm seeing things. I don't know what this means, but I'm not giving up my membership as an Adventist. But I don't know what to do. So gratefully for that, you know. But so we see a lot coming. I mean, we've got an election coming up. We're very close to having all things put in place.
We don't like view the Sunday law as this like singular event though, right? It's
No,
more okay.
I mean, because we have 2014 Sunday law as multiple events, but there are certainly going to be things that are going to stand out. So, like the upcoming election.
You know, I receive emails from the Florida legislative, the laws that are passed here in Florida. But one of them, it says that DeSantis is trying to get rid of all the wokeism, you know, all the leftists, you know, history. So going back to this history and having the right perspective is very important, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm just reviewing back to the Civil War of America, you know, parts 1 and 2, and you know the fact that David Barton did in undoing all the true history, like you know about Jefferson. You know, he wrote a book, The Jefferson Lies, and those kind of things. So it is very crucial that we, you know, go back to Elder Tessa's presentation
Mm-hmm.
and understand all this. Yeah.
Did you mention David Barton?
Wasn't it David Barton that wrote the Jefferson Lies? Or is
Yeah,
it?
he does fake history.
Okay. Yeah.
He is not a historian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him.
Mhm.
Mm. That's interesting that you can get emails from the legislative. That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like DeSantis did this and they're passing this and that.
Uh-huh.
They just put me in there. I didn't even sign up for it, but I guess they figured that I'm in Florida. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a good way to keep up.
Are there any
Any
other
other-
comments?
Thank you, Anna. That was very nice.
Thank you. Um,
Share your notes, Anna.
okay, I'll just I'll post this PowerPoint.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'll just close the prayer. Dear God in heaven, thank you for being with us throughout the week. We know you have led us in the past and that you're continuing to lead and guide us in the complexity of the events around us. Thank you for leading us so gently to better understand who you are. Please continue to help us to better understand your truths and help us to also practice what we profess. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 Thank you, Anna. Very good.
Thank you for all your thoughts and input. Thank you. I'll post my PowerPoint. Thank you. Happy Sabbath, everyone.
Happy Sabbath. We'll see you tomorrow.
Happy Sabbath. Good night.
Thanks, Annie. Happy Sabbath, everyone.